Well, Navya Care empowers every cancer patient, caregiver and physician with timely, personalized and affordable treatment plans. And we will be talking about Tata Memorial Centre and National Cancer Grid, NCG's response to the oxygen crisis and the preparedness for India. Gitika Srivastava, founder of the Navya Care, is joining us here on the broadcast, along with her Dr. C.S. Pramesh, who's the director of the Tata Memorial Hospital and coordinator with the National Cancer Grid. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us here on Republic. Gitika, you and Dr. Naresh, who are founders of the Navya Care, you've been working for a 10-year partnership with the Tata Memorial Centre. Can you give us the details, the journey, the planning that has been done, especially when it comes to shipping high-quality oxygen concentrators from the United States to India during the COVID pandemic?
Thank you. Absolutely, yes. So I think we started our efforts back in mid-April. We had the opportunity to send about 70-odd concentrators, and that led to this whole spiraling movement with Indian American donors coming forward because of the strong trust that they have with Tata Hospital in Bombay, that they were able to bring these concentrators to across the country. And we were able to coordinate and collaborate with philanthropists like Vinod Khosla, Desh Deshpande, number of other large foundations, which all stepped in and were able to bring in about $4.5 million. And that was how Naresh and I were able to get this support out here in the US, primarily because we had the strong on-ground partnership of Tata Hospital and the NCG in India.
Right. Dr. Pramesh, the first wave, if we talk about the TMC, was the de facto center for all COVID-positive cancer patients there in Mumbai. How did working with Navya Care leverage the informatics solutions and have served several thousands of patients over a free COVID hotline, sir?
That's a really good question. The fact that we were able to provide this service during the pandemic goes back actually 10 years, because we've been working with Navya over the last 10 years, providing expert opinion service to patients with cancer across the country and increasingly across the world as well. Over 30,000 opinions have been provided so far over the last few years. But this relationship stood us in good stead, especially during the first wave, where there was a national lockdown and patients found it difficult to travel to cities like Mumbai, Delhi or Chennai for accessing cancer care. So this was the gap that we were able to fill with Navya by providing an online web-based service, which collated all the reports from patients from across the country, put it in a structured format, shared it with experts within the Tata Memorial Centre and the National Cancer Grid. And we were able to offer opinions to thousands of patients during the pandemic who would otherwise not have had the facility of accessing quality cancer care. So this, to a large extent, has mitigated the problems that were faced by patients during this pandemic. And as we know, the challenges of traveling during the lockdown were immense. And this was one of the major factors that we were able to reduce the adverse impact of the lockdown and the pandemic on patients with cancer across the country.
Because the first wave, Gitika, it was very new, and we've seen a lot of people there actually now trying to cope up with what exactly COVID-19 is all about. But when the second wave hit India, it was devastating. And we have seen almost on the collapse of the lack of oxygen. There was a lot of issues that were faced by the Indian community. So how did you partner up with the, getting those concentrators from the community partners international in the US, then trying to get them back to India? How was the journey through the second wave?
So a lot of good people all around, I think, out here in the US, I think everyone wanted to do something about this whole O2 crisis, as we call it in India. But there was no real way for people to actually see the impact of their efforts. But here with Tata Memorial Hospital and National Cancer Grid, who basically manage the on-ground distribution and delivery, like we were able to provide almost live like feedback back to say that these 50 concentrators have reached this hospital in Assam. Like here's this picture of this like patient being able to use it, and that like really reinforced confidence amongst donors who still like continue to come forward to provide like capital to help us procure equipment and deliver it to India. And obviously, you know, like we are not experts in logistics, and we had to basically learn about like airway bills and freight forwarding and like custom clearance. But I think it was the need of the hour, and just by getting a lot of like good people rallying around this, it was made possible.
It was a challenge indeed, because Dr. Pramesh, if you talk about the main challenges, the singular focus, I'm sure, would have been getting these units to the hospitals and then throughout India to distribute them so that those patients who have been suffering can breathe well. That was the main challenge, I'm sure.
Absolutely. So unlike the first wave, where the main challenges were in getting adequate personal protective equipment for healthcare workers, making sure we had access to the evidence-based care, things like getting N95s in place. The second wave was a completely different picture altogether. By then, we had got our PPEs and N95s in place to a large extent. But the problem here was the lack of oxygen or the lack of access to safe oxygen. And what we were finding increasingly was the fact that people who could have been managed at home, people who could have been managed in a smaller center with something like just an oxygen concentrator, were increasingly coming to larger hospitals, clogging up ICUs, and preventing people who really needed ICU care from getting the kind of support that they needed. So we wanted to fill this gap, and that's the reason we reached out to assess demand and requirements for oxygen concentrators across several centers within the National Cancer Grid, and increasingly many more outside the National Cancer Grid as well, because this is not limited to hospitals within the NCG. So we realized that there was a huge requirement for oxygen concentrators, and though many organizations did work together on this, we were able to leverage the fact that our relationship with Navya was strong, the ability of Navya to get philanthropic donations from several organizations in the US. I must also add the contributions made by a group from New York, the Weill Cornell School of Medicine, the Presbyterian Hospital, where Dr. Parul Shukla, Dr. Shah, and Dr. Anand Joshi worked together to get close to $2 million worth of donations, and were able to ship those concentrators to India. Once it reached India, and again, thanks to Air India and FedEx, who helped a lot with the logistic transfers from the US to cities like Mumbai and Delhi, the next step was to actually get these to the hospitals which needed them the most. So we prioritized hospitals which were in the government sector, those who were in the charitable sector, and those who in regions where the second wave hit the most. And we were able to identify those, assess need, and match the supply with the demand. And again, Air India chipped in very heavily with providing us free transport to all the centers which were within India from these major cities like Mumbai and Delhi. So I think it was an all-round team effort which made this possible. But close to 6,000 concentrators were shipped to over 100 hospitals in different parts of the country, close to 18 states benefiting from this in every nook and corner of the country. The Northeast was an area that we focused on. Many states in the Northeast and centers which would otherwise have had many people dying just for lack of oxygen.
Gitika, the group also initiated the Together for India campaign to raise funds to purchase those lightweight concentrators portable for the use across India. What is the planning for ahead? Because it is being said that by the year end, there could be a third possible COVID wave that could hit India. Are you planning anything for the future in this course?
I think what we've done is to move our focus to these oxygen generation plants, allowing hospitals to make their own oxygen. And one of our doctors had mentioned that one oxygen plant can basically support 120 concentrators worth of oxygen every single day. And I think that's a good metric for us to go for and find, as many needy centers who don't have this infrastructure today to be empowered with these plants. So thus far we have about 9 plants committed, 5 or 6 installed. And if we can continue to get funding and we continue to have centers who do have this need, then the preparation of the third wave for us will be around strengthening the capacity for hospitals to be able to support their own O2 requirements. I think Dr. Pramesh was the one who advised us towards it to look into plant technologies and good manufacturers that would be able to support the COVID burden in India and be able to run in small towns, rural centers, or greenfield projects in a way for these O2 plants. Dr. Pramesh was able to select the ones, with the most need, as well as the ones where, good work is being done to impact a large number of patients. And we basically followed their lead in terms of where to install these plants. Dr. Pramesh might be able to add some more to that.
So Dr. Pramesh, because you've been talking about the distribution of the concentrators and it's been done over 20 states, and to set up those oxygen plants in rural hospitals, in high volume hospitals, what has been the hallmark of the story of cancer care providers in fight against COVID, Dr. Pramesh?
So I think it's important to understand that while the oxygen concentrators were a dire necessity at the time they came in, they are not a long-term solution. They are a good stopgap measure to bridge the crisis. But as a long-term solution, we realized that we needed to put in something which was longer lasting. And given the fact that COVID is not going anywhere in a hurry, and even if COVID were to disappear, the need for oxygen continues to be there because there are several other health conditions which require oxygen supply regularly. So we decided that the longer-term option or solution would be the installation of these oxygen generation plants. And as Gitika mentioned, each of these oxygen generation plants can support up to 120 beds. It's approximately 5 liters per minute that we are talking about. And we've been able to, so far with the support of philanthropists from the US, been able to set up 9 of these PSA oxygen plants in several parts of the country. And again, we've prioritized those centers which are high volume, which are in the government sector, and which would be able to use these long-term, regardless of whether COVID existed or not. So the general life cycle of these oxygen generation plants is anywhere from 10 to 15 years. So the kind of infrastructure that will go in now will not just help us tide over the crisis of COVID, but will be a long-lasting asset to the hospital where we set it up. And we were clear that we would not restrict this only to the metropolitan cities, but also in rural areas where otherwise oxygen supply could be a very big challenge if it weren't for these plants.
Gitika, how difficult was it to actually collect and to get all of those oxygen concentrators and then the shipment there to India? Was it the biggest challenge so far? Because time was of a crucial importance there, and there were several Air India passenger planes that landed in Delhi with another set of more than 400 concentrators. I believe there were more than 3 to 4 shipments that Tata Memorial Care Center has brought in over the last several weeks, especially during the devastating COVID wave.
Absolutely. We had 9 flights from here. We had some charter planes which were filled up with O2 concentrators. And those were slightly more organized because FedEx is known to do this. But to work with Air India, on their passenger planes, it was unique innovation, I would say, where Air India also stepped forward, and we were able to get local freight forwarders to help us out, but we've had to literally pick up these concentrators, load them into vans, and drive them to the airport for the first shipment that we had made back in April. But we learned a lot along the way. And I think we learned, most helpful point here was I think TMC's ability to get customs cleared on time and then to have those concentrators delivered onward across India. So I think, within 2 days, it was actually possible to have the concentrator be shipped from here and at a hospital bed being used. And I think that that inspiration and that feeling is what allowed a lot of people to come forward. And we still continue to get donors who are coming forward to help with this. And that's quite heartening, as you can imagine.
Well, quite commendable work there, of course, because time was very, very important there. But a lot of communication and coordination also went through it, because it must have not been an easy task. Dr. Pramesh, for portable oxygen concentrators, because how did it actually help decongesting the ICUs and the oxygen beds? We know that most of the hospitals were running out of ICU beds, and the truly needy patients, how was it done to actually offer them home support for patients with mild illnesses?
So the oxygen concentrators were useful in two ways. One is the hospital-based oxygen concentrator use, which meant that patients, the hospital had the ability to scale up their oxygen beds quite quickly and in very short notice. So hospitals which otherwise would have had X number of patients being on oxygen were suddenly able to multiply that by 2X or 3X, and thereby take in a larger number of patients who would require oxygen for their care. The second opportunity that this gave us was to get the hospital to support patients at home with these concentrators. So a kind of a rental system was used, where I use the word rental just to explain the mechanism. This was actually provided free of cost, that the hospital actually sent these concentrators to patients' homes till the time the patient required oxygen at home. And if the patient got better, the same concentrator was sent back to the hospital, cleaned, and sent to another patient who required it. So it wasn't just supporting patients at the hospital, but to a large extent, patients at home as well. So between these two interventions, what ended up happening was that the ICU beds started getting reserved for patients who required ventilation or more sophisticated care, thereby probably saving far more lives than we otherwise would have been able to.
Let me add to that.
Gitika, the outreach program for how many states, cities and towns? Yes, please go on. That because we're talking about oxygen concentrators that can actually support 60 patients a month. And each oxygen plant supplies oxygen, which is equal to 120 concentrators in a day. So if we talk about many of those 9 plants that have been set across centers in rural parts of the country, I mean, that's a really commendable job that has been done on your part. But if we talk about the outreach program, how many cities, towns, remote areas that we are looking at that has been covered?
So, the concentrators would reach across, I think, 21 states, including Nagaland, Manipur, Mizoram, etc. Assam in the northeast. We've had these concentrators being used in small huts in Tamil Nadu, which I think was a site we'll never really forget. And in terms of these plants, I think, again, Dr. Pramesh was able to help us select areas which were in rural Maharashtra, in UP, Muzaffarpur, Mulanpur, and areas where, Silchar in Assam, where this infrastructure has been lacking, and we've had to literally construct the shed where these concentrators were housed. And obviously it's a challenging job, both in terms of the electrical equipment required, but also safety. And so, the hospitals also came forward, embraced that challenge, and they were able to get these set up across 9 hospitals in 9 states so far.
Wow. All right, Dr. Pramesh, because if we talk about patients who have serious illnesses, comorbid, and if we talk about cancer care, that continues despite the pandemic. What we are told, over 2,000 patients with cancer and COVID-19 that have been treated for COVID-19 in various TMC centers. Can you throw more light on that, please?
Yes. So as we know, cancer is not an elective situation where you can afford to delay treatment. You would probably lose far more lives by delaying treatment for cancer more than COVID itself. So we took a very conscious decision very early in the beginning of the pandemic, as early as March of 2020, when the pandemic began to hit India, that we would not stop cancer care for our patients. At the same time, we did realize that we had the responsibility of taking care of patients with COVID as well. So we did what we were best at, which is to treat patients with cancer who developed COVID. And you're right, we've treated over 2,000 patients, in fact, more than 2,500 patients who with cancer who developed COVID over the last 18 months. And I think this is one of the largest experiences anywhere in the world.
Absolutely. Great to have you with us, Dr. Pramesh and Gitika. And this is a commendable work that has been done. Of course, Tata Memorial Hospitals and Navya Care flying more than 3,800 O2 concentrators, more than 3 lakh masks from the US-based Indians that are also pitching in. Help India beat COVID-19. Thank you very much for the great work that is being done. All the best. Thank you, Gitika. Thank you, Dr. Pramesh.